Princess Margaret was never meant to wear the crown, but she became one of the clearest mirrors of the monarchy's hidden wounds. She was Queen Elizabeth II's younger sister. The dazzling one, the reckless one. The woman watched for fashion parties, romance scandal, and sharp remarks. Elizabeth became duty. Margaret became desire, trapped inside duty. Behind the glamorous photographs was a royal life shaped by loss, forbidden love, a broken marriage, public humiliation, and a loyalty to the Queen that survived almost everything. Margaret Rose was born on August 21st, 1930 at Glamis Castle in Scotland. Her mother, Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, wife of Albert, Duke of York, had gone into a long labour while visiting her parents, the Earl and Countess of Strathmore and Kinghorn. The Home Secretary waited for hours because he had to witness a royal birth. The baby was delivered by cesarean section, just like her older sister Elizabeth. At birth, Margaret was fourth in line to the throne. Ahead of her were her uncle Edward, Prince of Wales, her father Albert, and her sister Elizabeth. No one expected her to live near the centre of power. Edward was handsome, popular, and 36 years old. The family assumed he would marry and produce the next heir. The sisters were close but completely different. Elizabeth was shy, serious, formal, and careful. Margaret was bright, playful, impulsive, and mischievous. She loved music pranks, ghost stories, and attention. When she got into trouble, she often made her father laugh and escaped punishment. Some palace staff thought she was spoiled. Even Elizabeth once complained that Margaret wanted everything she wanted. In 1936, King George V died, and Margaret's uncle became King Edward VIII. But Edward wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had divorced once and was still married to her second husband. As king, he was head of the Church of England, which did not accept remarriage while a former spouse was alive. The government forced him to choose Wallis or the throne. After only 11 months, as King Edward abdicated, Margaret was 6. Her father became King George VI. Elizabeth at 10 became heir presumptive. Margaret became second in line. Elizabeth explained it to her little sister. Uncle was going away and Papa was going to be king. When Margaret asked if that meant Elizabeth would be queen one day, Elizabeth said yes. In 1939, Britain went to war with Germany. A Nazi plot to kidnap the princesses was uncovered. Winston Churchill wanted Elizabeth and Margaret sent to Canada, but their parents refused. The girls were moved to Windsor Castle, close enough for the king and queen to visit on weekends. Elizabeth grew into duty. At 18, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service. Margaret was only 14 and exempt. She practiced piano, sang show tunes, and became the livelier presence at royal gatherings. Relatives thought her parents overindulged her. At parties, she stole the room. Elizabeth said it was easier when Margaret was there because everyone laughed at what she said. On V-Day, in 1945, King George VI, Queen Elizabeth, 19-year-old Elizabeth, and 14-year-old Margaret appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with Winston Churchill. That night, the princesses joined the crowd secretly with 16 trusted courtiers. They danced with strangers, joined a conga line through the Ritz Hotel, and walked through St. James Park after dark. For one night, they were young women in a city celebrating survival. After the war, Group Captain Peter Townsend entered the royal household. He was a handsome Royal Air Force hero who had shot down 11 German planes. He became equerry to King George VI. Elizabeth teased Margaret that it was bad luck because Peter was already married. In 1947, the royal family went on a 3-month tour of South Africa. Peter was assigned as Margaret's chaperone. At first, he treated her as an indulged child. That same year, Elizabeth married Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. For the first time, the sisters were separated in daily life, though they still spoke by phone every day. As Elizabeth became a wife and mother, Margaret moved farther from the throne. Charles was born then Anne, but Margaret became something else, a royal celebrity. By 17, she had an 18-inch waist, striking blue eyes, and the power to command attention. She toured Italy, Switzerland, and France. She became president or patron of charities. Fashion magazines adored her. Christian Dior became her friend and one of her favorite designers. The press became obsessed with her social life. Her circle was known as the Margaret set. They gathered at the 400 Club Café de Paris and Mirabelle restaurant. She danced the can-can on stage with 10 other girls and caused a tabloid storm. She was linked to more than 30 rich or titled bachelors, including Prince Henry of Hesse, King Michael of Romania, David Mountbatten, John Turner of Canada, and Prince Nicholas of Yugoslavia. For a time, her favorite companion was Billy Wallace, a childhood friend and heir to a fortune. Many expected an engagement around her 21st birthday at Balmoral. Instead, one man kept appearing in the background of royal photographs. Peter Townsend. 1 month after Margaret's 21st birthday, King George VI underwent surgery for lung cancer. He had smoked heavily for years. Margaret was made one of the councillors of state and took on some duties while he recovered. The king was too weak to go on a Commonwealth tour, so Elizabeth went with Philip. The family gathered to wave them goodbye. It was the last time us four would be together. On February 6, 1952, King George VI died in his sleep at Sandringham. He was 56. Elizabeth was in Kenya when she heard the news and returned home as queen. Margaret was shattered. For months, she attended church twice a day. After losing the father she adored, she also inherited his worst habit. Smoking became an addiction. Elizabeth moved into Buckingham Palace. Margaret and the Queen Mother moved into Clarence House. Peter Townsend came with them as controller of their household. King George VI had treated Peter almost like the son he never had. Margaret and Peter bonded over grief and loneliness. By late 1952 or early 1953, their attraction became a serious romance. Peter was 15 years older than Margaret and in the middle of a divorce. He proposed. Margaret accepted with joy. She wanted what Elizabeth had: a loving husband and children, but the monarchy stood in the way. Under the Royal Marriages Act of 1772, Margaret needed the Queen's permission to marry. Peter was divorced, and the memory of Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson was still raw. Elizabeth was head of the Church of England. If she approved the marriage, it could create a constitutional crisis. The Queen asked Margaret to wait until after the coronation and keep the relationship secret. Then, Margaret was photographed brushing fluff from Peter's coat. The press exploded. Public opinion was divided, but many ordinary people supported her. The government opposed the match. While Margaret was on a tour of Rhodesia, Peter was sent to the British Embassy in Brussels. The separation was meant to cool the romance. Elizabeth advised Margaret to wait until her 25th birthday, when she could marry without the sovereign's approval. For 2 years, Peter lived mostly alone in Brussels, and Margaret continued her public life in London. When she turned 25, Peter returned. The press expected an engagement. Instead, Margaret announced she would not marry him. The reason remains uncertain. If she married Peter, she would likely have had to give up her place in the succession and her civil list allowance. They would have lived on his veteran pension. It is also possible that 2 years apart had cooled the passion. Still, the romance changed public feeling and helped prepare the way for later royal divorces. After Peter, the Margaret set faded. Margaret accepted a proposal from Billy Wallace, then broke it off when she learned he had been unfaithful. As she approached 30, the press wondered if she would ever marry. Then came Anthony Armstrong Jones, a fashionable photographer from outside the old aristocratic world. One day after Margaret learned that Peter Townsend was engaged to a much younger woman who resembled her, she accepted Anthony's proposal. He gave her a ruby ring surrounded by diamonds in the shape of a rose. When the engagement was announced, the press was shocked. After so many aristocratic suitors, Margaret was marrying a commoner. The public loved it. Margaret and Anthony married at Westminster Abbey in May 1960. The mall was decorated with white satin banners and arches of pink and red roses. Margaret wore plain enough to show off the Baltimore tiara, which she had bought at auction. Prince Philip walked her down the aisle. Princess Anne was a bridesmaid. It was the first royal wedding ever televised, watched by about 300 million people worldwide. Queen Elizabeth made the couple Earl and Countess of Snowdon. One of Margaret's old boyfriends gave her land on the private Caribbean island of Mustique. The newlyweds visited it during their 6-week honeymoon aboard the royal yacht Britannia. Back in London, they moved into Kensington Palace. At first, They seemed to define the 1960s. Margaret brought society glamour. Anthony brought artists, photographers, and a modern eye. They were photographed with the Beatles' Frank Sinatra and Sophia Loren. While the Queen favored neat suits and simple jewels, Margaret wore bold colors, glamorous sunglasses, floral prints, and bright headscarves. They had 2 children. David was born in 1961. Sarah was born in 1964. Both births were by cesarean section at Margaret's request, while she was sedated with what was called twilight sleep. In 1965, the Snowdons made a highly publicized tour of the United States. Margaret danced with President Lyndon Johnson at the White House. The American press loved her wit, but in Britain the cost of the trip caused criticism. Behind the glamour, the marriage was cracking. During their honeymoon, Anthony learned that one of his girlfriends in London had given birth to his daughter. His affairs continued after marriage. He was linked to both women and men. Margaret wanted faithfulness, but rejection pushed her toward others. She was rumored to be connected with Mick Jagger, Peter Sellers, Warren Beatty, and Australian cricketer Keith Miller, though proof was weak. At 43, Margaret met 26-year-old gardener Rodney Llewellyn. He was young, relaxed, and far outside the royal system. She invited him to Mustique, her Caribbean refuge. Their relationship became impossible to hide. In 1976, photographs of Margaret and Rodney in swimsuits were published. The scandal exploded. Margaret and Anthony separated. The press attacked her. Some called her a royal parasite. Politicians discussed removing her from the civil list. During the crisis, Margaret suffered alcoholic hepatitis and a nervous breakdown. Her children, David and Sarah, often stayed with their aunt, Elizabeth, who remained loyal to her sister. In 1978, Margaret became the first senior royal to divorce since Henry VIII, more than 400 years earlier. A few months later, Anthony married his longtime mistress, Lucy Lindsay Hogg. Margaret and Rodney continued for about 3 more years. In 1981, he married someone else and Margaret gave him her blessing. After the scandals, Margaret devoted more of her life to supporting the Queen and charitable work. She was connected to around 80 organizations. She served as president of the Girl Guides, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, and the Royal Ballet. Some public affection returned, though she remained famously difficult, formal one moment and cuttingly funny the next. She also became close to Princess Diana when Diana married Prince Charles and moved near her at Kensington Palace. They shopped together and went to the theater. Margaret supported Diana during her separation because she understood marital pain. But after Diana's Panorama interview, where Diana said Charles should not be king, Margaret turned against her. When Diana died in 1997, the 2 women were not speaking. In 1993, Margaret secretly met Peter Townsend again. They spoke like old friends. He died the next year. By then, Margaret's health was failing. Decades of smoking and drinking had damaged her body. Like her father, she had part of a lung removed. She quit smoking but continued drinking. In 1999, she scalded her feet in the bathroom and her mobility suffered. She often used a wheelchair. A series of strokes left her partially blind. One of her last public appearances came in August 2001 at the 101st birthday celebration of the Queen Mother. After the 50th anniversary of her father's death, Margaret was admitted to hospital in London. She died on February 9, 2002 at the age of 71. Queen Elizabeth was devastated and asked Prince Charles to give a televised address because she feared she would lose her composure. 1 month later, the Queen Mother died at 101. There was no room for another coffin beneath the King George VI Memorial Chapel at Windsor, so Margaret broke royal tradition even in death. She was cremated. Her ashes were placed beside the parents she had loved so deeply. 20 years later, Queen Elizabeth II was laid to rest there too. The family King George VI once called us 4 was together again. Princess Margaret was not only the scandalous sister, she was the royal spare who revealed the cost of standing close to power without holding it. She lost Peter Townsend and helped change public feeling about divorce. She married Anthony Armstrong Jones and became a symbol of modern glamour, then proved that glamour could hide misery. She fell in love again, was punished by the press, and still returned to duty.